Hi, this is a quick revision of Chainsaw vs. the Pampas Grass by Simon Armitage. The poem's one that's full of personification that might create a sense of identity between the chainsaw and the man-made or artificial, in contrast to the Pampas grass, which could be seen to symbolise nature. The personification takes many forms and covers almost the entire poem, which might suggest that the chainsaw is being presented as violent, reckless, aggressive, depending on the nature of the particular piece of personification. If we just have a look at a few of them. First of all, we've got, very early on, knocked back a quarter of a pint of engine oil. It's difficult to avoid the association with drinking alcohol and the kind of violence and Dutch courage that might be associated with that. And it's almost as if the chainsaw's gendered, it's masculine in its approach, and that's something that runs through in the kind of violent and dangerous representations that follow. It's described as lashing out, that kind of violence that doesn't seem to be checked and doesn't seem to be carefully directed. And one of the really interesting ones, I think, is its sweet tooth. That's homographic pun on the word tooth, because you have a literal tooth of a chainsaw itself, and then you have obviously the tooth of the human in this case that's been described as a sweet tooth, which is a phrase that we tend to use to describe someone liking to eat, sweets and things along those lines, and can connote a sense of greed and excess. In this case, it's a greed for destruction and violence, in particular a greed for destroying, and it's also specifically about destroying the skin of a human being if it actually bounces back. There's an alliterative use of fricatives in what follows, which could be suggesting that it's overwhelming, powerful and swift. If you couple that with its mood to tangle with cloth or jewellery or hair, which is particularly disturbing because the polysyndeton gives a sense of the indiscriminate power that's applied by the chainsaw. It's almost as if it wants to attack anything or everything. Now, a huge contrast to this is the Pampas grass itself, which is described as passive and calm. It's sunning itself, and the chromomorphism that's used, its footstools, cushions, conveys soft. It conveys a sense in which this is something that's gentle and passive, in huge contrast to the chainsaw. Armitage actually says that what's happening here is overkill, that holophrastic sentence creating a real sense of finality. There is no comparison between the chainsaw and the Pampas grass. The Pampas grass is just going to get massacred. Towards the end of the poem, however, the Pampas grass is personified. Having done all it can to the Pampas grass, the chainsaw's returned to the garage, but the Pampas grass, after a short period of time, is riding high in its saddle, wearing a new crown. There's this language that's associated with royalty. It dominates, it is superior, it has the high status, high both in a literal sense in that it's risen up to a high point, and high in terms of its status relative to the chainsaw. And that new crown could be a reference, of course, to the kind of feathered plumage of the Pampas grass itself. And finally, we get a sense that the Pampas grass hasn't just come back, but it's come back in abundance. We have the description corn in Egypt, that metaphor alluding to the way in which, I suppose, in the Roman period, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. The large majority of the corn that was produced to feed the Roman Empire came from the banks of the River Nile, and so you have this sense of, a huge amount of vegetation being produced. It's almost mocking the efforts of the Pampas grass. Okay, cheers. Oh, sorry, not Pampas grass, the chainsaw. Cheers.
Created using Powtoon.